and welcome to this very special Cloud Migration Summit episode on live panel. Now, the Cloud Migration Summit, there's going to be several topics that are discussed on that, and what we want to achieve here is to have this kind of marriage of topics. And like any good wedding, we want to have a sample menu. So here today to discuss a little sample menu of ideas around cloud migration are my wonderful guests. I have Tom Alisi, John Abel, and Leo Mindel. Gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves and say what you do? We'll start with yourself.
Oh, hello. I founded Deep Ventures a few years ago. It's a small boutique consultancy firm, and we have specialized in cloud computing, data science, digital transformation in general. Worked with a few companies. The biggest client has been so far Pirelli tires. So we've worked a lot in industrial manufacturing.
And John?
Yes, I'm the Vice President of Cloud and Technology and also cover the innovation for UK, Ireland and Israel, mostly focus on disrupting using disruptive technology in cloud.
Excellent.
I founded a digital sports agency 19 years ago. We are 100% cloud-based now for all of our product that we deliver.
Okay, excellent. So three experts for our expert panel. So let's begin with the starters. Starters on a menu. The first thing that everybody asks about, data security. Now, when migrating to the cloud, we speak to, and you hear a lot of stories from CIOs, CTOs saying the same thing. I like this idea of public cloud. I think it's great, but I'm not so sure about the security. I keep hearing all these horror stories. Do you think they're founded? Why do you think people are wary about cloud migration in terms of security? John?
So, I mean, it's a really good question because when people are looking at security, and they've got to understand security has always been in depth. You know, just having a good firewall is not good enough. So one of the things, and obviously we're one of those cloud vendors, is we have to have security across the portfolio because, you know, any element could be breached. So you have to have security in depth for customers. The other thing as well, which we do, is we encrypt by default. So we always say to the customers, you're the custodian of your keys, not us, because obviously, you know, getting hold of the data, if it was possible, and, you know, with us, it should never be possible. We want to make sure it's encrypted at all times, not only in motion, but at rest. But these days, the amount of effort you have to put into security, really, it's big companies like Oracle that have got that capability on tap. They're the ones that are going to invest in this the heaviest. You know, a lot of SME and smaller companies will struggle to find those niche experts to make their platform secure. You know, one of the stats you always hear about is sort of 80% plus of vulnerabilities because customers haven't applied patches. That's what we've got to do as a duty of care for our customers, is keep making sure it's refreshed and up to date.
Leo, do you have a...
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said there with John. The way cloud offers you an opportunity to reset problems that you have in your environment or have had traditionally in your environment. Security isn't a new thing, but what is very good about where we're working with cloud providers is that they are doing a lot of the hygiene factors that you were seeing missing in environments that people had where they had their own servers. Patching is a good example. Password protection is huge. It's a huge issue. It always will be. The biggest issue of the security is always between the keyboard and the seat.
And what about yourself, Tom? What have you seen?
I think in addition to that, absolutely good, but I don't think that security can be seen as a static object. It's not something that you create and once you have secured your cloud is kind of locked and working. It's something that evolves, particularly when you have teams adopting different tools, growing, and the adoption of technology nowadays is quite fast. So you might have a whole range of new tools that are coming up in the past 6 months that have been progressively adopted by the teams, and you the process of assessment is simply not fast enough in terms of security. So it needs to become part of the culture and progressively be dynamically assessed.
It's interesting because a lot of the conversations that people have around cloud technology, they say, you move on to the cloud, you can understand the costs and things like that. And sometimes security is seen as a bit of a bolt-on or an afterthought. And as you've said, it can be a bit of a rolling cost and one that needs to continually evolving. How seriously do you think people take security in the cloud when it comes to cost? I mean, do you think they see the cost benefit of it, or is it a psychological thing? A lot of people just don't get it.
I think from what I've seen in big companies, at least, is you start with small prototypes, you start assessing a new solution, and because of the natural way of doing it, the prototype normally becomes the product, and that's bad. So the only way I've seen working quite effectively so far is working since day one with cybersecurity, sitting down at the table with them, discussing solutions and progressively adopting whatever it needs to keep the product safe.
See, we take a slightly different approach to some of the cloud vendors out there. So we believe that security is by default, not by accept. So one of the things you've got to do is that you need to make security like the DNA. It can't be without it. You need it with it. So and we believe that if you secure it and make the user have to unsecure it is a lot safer for how they use productivity, because a lot of people aren't security experts. So training everybody to be a security expert is something where you can't keep up to speed with vulnerabilities. You need to have a big element of technical experts to enable you to do that, and we're very lucky we have that. But so we take security by default and make the user want to unsecure it if it's sensible to do so.
And Leo, any final thoughts on security?
I think the key thing that we found with cloud is it offers us the opportunity to jump ahead on security. By what I mean by that is that when we moved over, we were able to say, this is the stack that we're going to run on. So we had already advanced beyond where we were, from the versions and everything that we were on to new versions. And then we're able to spin up environments to test and migrate and flip between. That was really, really difficult when you had your own hardware, when you had your own infrastructure. You're able to use the whole environment to be able to test, create sandboxes and move forward under cloud, which is much, much easier. And that has helped. And I think the other thing that we did, and John sort of talked about it in a way, is we made it mandatory before we moved over that there's certain levels of security, that things that we've been running for 19 years, we left behind.
Well, I'm going to stay on you, Leo, because we're moving off the starter now. The plates have gone, and now we're moving on to the main course. And the main course, what I want to talk about is this thorny topic of vendor lock-in. So CTOs, they say, I love the cloud, it's great. I can just move straight into the cloud. I've got this whole multi-cloud thing where I've got different things going on, but a little bit concerned about this idea of being locked in. So if I migrate everything, am I stuck? How would you advise someone to approach that?
I think the first thing that people look at is you've got to get over to be 100% cloud-based. That's where we made a decision. We made a decision it was going to take us, we estimated somewhere in the region of 2 years, and it took nearly double that to do the whole migration. And then we moved over and we're now cloud-based. We chose to go to a single provider at that point because it was easier to move over, with the sole intention that once we moved over, we were able to evaluate the other systems and other opportunities. But when you're on your own hosting and trying to move, that is a much bigger step than moving from one cloud provision to another. And I think once you made that move and you're actually you are cloud-based, you're able to sit there and go, well, does this service work? Does that service work? And we have actually taken out certain services and put them with other providers. But the biggest issue was getting from the on-site to cloud.
I've seen that very interesting approach. I wasn't even thinking about that because I've probably seen over the past few years most things I've worked with were natively on public cloud. The fears I've seen in terms of vendor lock-in were more specific to services like serverless or something that is offered by a specific provider. What I've seen so far as an effective approach is to make that layer as thin as possible and have the business logic being as independent as possible. So that in general allows to create the interface that can be adapted to different providers. And normally the transition is not that heavy and allows also to use the advantages that different cloud providers would be able to offer.
Well, I'll throw this question open to the panel, pointing on one in particular. The idea that we've got this public cloud, and people say, oh, public cloud's great, but there's also this hybrid cloud where people have got a system here and a system here and a system here. Do you think companies will ever move to a public cloud, or do you think we'll always be in a kind of a hybrid cloud world?
You've moved everything to public cloud.
I've moved everything to public cloud, absolutely. And I look at this going back to the dawn of time when I was used to work in the Microsoft environment under messaging, which is now Outlook. I would turn around to any company that's still running their own 365 servers internally and said, what are you doing? The first decent night's sleep I had was the day we turned off those mail servers. And that's what cloud offers. And you've got to look at it and say, okay, you can stick your money under your bed and then hope the house doesn't burn down, or you move your money to the cloud environment. And that's really, I think, the more we look at it, the more things that you feel that you're currently doing which could be reviewed or seen as hygiene, and the more those you can't spend your time doing. So running servers, worrying about air conditioning, all those sort of things go away when you start saying, that isn't our core business. Our core business is delivering our business. Let somebody else who's an expert deal with that piece.
And I think the important point of this is that when we talk cloud, we inherently, everybody goes to IaaS. They go to infrastructure as a service. Every business I work with is hybrid by default. They've got SaaS, platform services, or they have infrastructure service. The thing customers have got to realise, and the thing we try to educate them, is to understand the difference between them. Because, I was with a CFO recently, he said, my cloud costs me much more. Why? And I said, well, how many cars have you got in your personal life? And he said, 2. I said, is 2 more expensive than 1? Of course it is. It's very easy to get 2 of the same. So, you've got to be rigorous with why you're using it, what business value you're using it for. Certain industries are higher cadence towards a public cloud. Some are slower because of regulatory. Every industry is slightly different. The important point working with any cloud vendor is there a reverse gear as well as a forward gear? If you get to the situation when, vendor lock-in through value, may be totally acceptable. But if you're, especially in IaaS, with now the emergences of Kubernetes and containerization, there's no reason why you should be stuck to one cloud vendor. You can lift and move around. And actually, we believe the world you're moving to is it will be, I use this one today for this purpose and this one tomorrow for another purpose. And it will be down to service and price and quality and all of those aspects. Moving from mindset of product to service, that's what customers, we're having to go through that huge cultural shift internally at Oracle as well. But, we've got to remember cloud is not just one type of form.
Well, so we move from the stodgy main course of vendor lock-in to the very sweet topic of artificial intelligence. So, artificial intelligence, now this is a buzzword. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. It means different things to different people. And a lot of times it's a badge just stuck on something that maybe isn't artificial intelligence. Practical applications of AI. Who has seen practical applications of AI, and have they added any value, particularly around cloud computing?
So I mentioned earlier our digital sports agency. Just to put that into context, we deliver websites and other things for very large professional sports clubs and governing bodies. An example of that is that when there's a tournament happening or a rugby match, you're sitting there and you're getting lots and lots of images and pictures in. So one of the areas that we've looked at on the AI side is how do you recognize that player? How do you recognize them very quickly, very easily, so you can then display their stats just by their picture? And AI lends it to it. So we've been looking at that environment for that. That to us is a really nice use. You could argue it's almost, it isn't, is it AI or is it machine learning? Because you're just looking and learning on that side. Cloud, to build the technology to do that, the infrastructure, the processing power that we would need for the period of the 80 minutes is just not worth it. That's where we would be doing it under cloud.
And John, do you see that big businesses and are approaching AI in one way, and startups are approaching AI in a different way? Do you see differences?
I mean, if you look at the fastest growing companies on the planet, they're going to be based around AI. And I think we get hung up with the term AI. Everybody wants to talk about AI. There is specific value in machine learning, which is one element of AI. But the way I look at it is companies like us, we use AI in our development. So we've got a new technology called Autonomous, which is one of these AI-driven development technologies where the technology itself was developed and patched and self-heals via technology. There's customers that have embedded AI in our applications. We've used AI for automating how you do approvals, because everybody's approval patterns are similar. And that's outside of deep learning, etc., that you would have for using photos. And then last of all, we provide it, so you can have it within analytic tools. These days, it's pretty impossible to get away from it, because the volume of data we're dealing with now, the human can't deal with the volume anymore. So you need to have technology that provides a much easier user interface for the person. And the world we're going to is that it's a bit like people say to me about AI and machine learning. The inhibitor is really culture, politics, and religion. When do we use it? How do we use it? And all of those are more enablers to adopt it faster, or sort of de-accelerators to make us a bit more unsure about it. The technology has been here for years, but we're now seeing it because compute is much more lower cost than it's ever been, which means it's much more accessible by people.
And finally, Tom, what have you seen around the AI sphere?
It's to your point, not only is much cheaper computing, but also it's commoditized more and more, machine learning functionalities. So I've seen it practically applied to the industrial manufacturing sector, where it helps to all sorts of tasks, from optimizing logistics to predictive maintenance to failure prediction, outlier detection, etc. So it's more and more something that it's becoming part of even the kind of legacy or traditional sectors. There's a big gap though between the AI that is being told in presentations and how the day-to-day machine learning is applied, though.
Yeah.
But it shows benefits, and they're measurable, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that when people think about AI, they're thinking this. I say to students come to me and say what jobs are going to be around once AI. Let's get into that. When I started my career, the job I did then is not the job I do now. The tools and technology we have now is not when I started. The thing that we've got to realise is anything that's got a repetitive, well-trodden path of logic will be replaced by these technologies like AI and a subform of it, machine learning. But the creative bit is going to be still a human, and because the light bulb moment is a human gift. And I think that what we've got to do is The thing that I'm probably more interested about is how do you as a business say, this is repetitive, we're going to use this type of technology, emerging machine learning, etc. And this is creative, and investing in the skills to have a creative mindset workforce, because it's going to be those that can find the needle in the haystack, not necessarily the computer.
Well, so that's our sweet tooth satisfied completely. We're going to move on to the coffee before we get into our final bit. So we've spoken about AI, we've spoken about cloud, and earlier, Tom, you spoke about security and the evolution of security. But what I want to ask about is budgets, the horrible topic of budgets, because cloud can be seen as fluid. What do you think are the biggest challenges that people have when budgeting for cloud spend?
Getting off the rails. Normally, I've seen, again, from prototype to product, something that you'd start with a couple of instances. I'm not talking about legacy IT or like mail server, something that is solid and well known. But more often than not, you would start with a little pilot that normally is run on a couple of either orchestrators or any kind of services. And then fast forward 6 months, 9 months, you find yourself with 10, 15 servers. So that's scaled tenfold or something. And it doesn't take any advantage of request instances or any kind of cost efficiencies that can be introduced. It's similar, the approach is similar to what we were discussing, in my opinion, for the security. We need to be on board on that case since day one. We need to understand that the development of that product will need to take advantage of the possible cost efficiencies that the cloud offer. And that it's intrinsic in part of the development, in my opinion.
I mean, John, you seem like a sensible man. How would you sensibly look to budgeting for cloud? What kind of advice?
It's like everything. There's two sort of like recipes for cloud. There's some, in many research, cloud has been proven it won't always save you money. Yeah. But if you're going into, if you're having to defend from the unknown competitor, most industries get disrupted by the unknown competitor, then you need to have speed of execution. You can't beat the speed that you can get with a cloud-based solution. The agility you get, the flexibility. We've got customers that within days, they're operationally running a brand new business, where in old school, they would be operating in a year. So you can't beat the speed to execution. The barrier of entry is lower. But also, back to my 2 cars in the garage, don't, necessarily think what you're buying. It's got to be, what's the business value I get from it? Is it going to be cost reduction, or is it going to be I'm more secure? Is it going to be that I have new technology? If you look at most businesses in the UK at the moment, they're struggling with talent. Is it easier I buy a platform service that gives me instant talent rather than me having to find the talent? So, I think understand the business requirement, understand the business need, make sure you're picking the cloud solution that aligns to that, and focus in on that. And you will save effort, which will mean you will save time and you will save money.
And you, of course, have experience of this, having moved everything to the cloud. How was budgeting? What advice would you give to someone?
I think I'll take it further from where John was saying. You actually have to decide what you're buying and then the value of that. So if you're doing straight like for like, cloud can become more expensive or looks more expensive, but you're able to move from where you were in one platform to a completely new platform and the opportunities that come out of it. I think the biggest problem we found with budgeting around cloud is the reality is it's very easy to turn things on. It's very easy for those costs to spiral. It's also very easy, if you're managing it, to push the costs back down again. And I think it's the area that people don't do enough of at times, is they actually sit there and go, why are we using this? Why are we doing that? And we actually have put into the business that we do this on a regular basis. So every month we're reviewing our cloud spend and where we're going. It isn't to reduce the spend. It's to make sure we're using the right services. And actually we get more value out of using the right services, even to the point that staff have a better life because they're not having to do things in the middle of the night, because actually we are letting the cloud systems scale up and scale down, which we just wouldn't be able to do in the past. That's where we see it as the advantage. So it's difficult to say, is it saving us hard money? Actually, it is. It is, because it's saving us cost and spend on staffing, cost and spending with customers, where we are improving our service.
Okay, excellent. Well, we hope you enjoyed the meal. We're now going to move on to the final part of any wedding, which is the party. Now, as with any party, you have strangers, you have friends, you have family. There could be divorces, there could be fights, there could be new friendships to be made. And with that in mind, we're going to move on to this idea of cloud wars, where loyalty is often seen as not being a factor. You, of course, have all these different kinds of infrastructures. You have hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, public cloud, all these different things to choose from. What advice would you give someone when they're considering what type of cloud to go on to? I'll start with you.
Go ahead and test everything, prototype and play with everything as fast as you can. There are plenty of services, amazing things around, and the documentation readily available. There's massive opportunities, and the market is going east, so there's great opportunity there as well.
And maybe change this question a little bit, John. This is how you start the journey, but what needs to be considered is the operational running of a company. How would companies evaluate whether or not that what's being tried will actually run for the company?
I think the important bit is that I hear way too many customers talk about their strategy being a cloud company. Your strategy is your strategy. Yeah. Don't get wedded to one vendor, because where we're investing our R&D spend may be exactly what you need today or not. But where you might be needing it tomorrow, we might be just in the right spot. You've got to stop thinking like heritage. It's a use it, consume it, grow it, or shrink it. Do not get wedded to a single vendor. Hopefully companies like Oracle will show that their R&D, show you value, and you'll use it. But, we learn quickly as well as you. So, please don't align your strategy to a single cloud vendor as the strategy. It's definitely going to be multi-cloud, and it's definitely going to be choice that decides where you go.
Do you agree with what John said?
Yeah, I think that's very important. Any company should be looking at the strategy of what they do. It's what you deliver. If you look at Uber, is Uber a minicab company or is it a transport company? If you look at them as a transport company to transport people from A to B, they have minicabs at the moment. What they have in the future, who knows? That's what you have to look at, and that's really important. For us, we're delivering solutions online, and we're delivering to what was, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was all to desktop PCs. It's now to a completely different environment, and that's the environment that we are using. And at the moment, we're using, as you said, we're using cloud to do that. Are we a cloud company? That's a very, very risky thing, because cloud will be replaced by something else, as software as a service was, and all of these other things were. We're just always moving on.
And as a final thought, I'll use you as a case study, but I'll get you all to answer this question. If you could give one piece of advice for someone who is considering a cloud migration, what would you give them? It's a very tough question.
I think it isn't actually. The biggest problem that you will have is your legacy, is getting rid of your legacy. And it almost has to be, there will be a day in time when you will go, you've got to turn it off. Because until you turn it off, your freedom, until you're pushed out of the nest, you're never ever going to take the advantages, because everything is still tied back to the old environment. And we had a reason that we had to make that move, and a sudden move, and it was the best and worst 24 hours of the company. And once over, we have never looked back, and it's that moment will come to most companies that are migrating. So make sure you plan that ideally and do it.
And just on that point, the thing that it's the basics. Communicate to the people involved. The art of communication is lost in many migrations because they think it's a technical act. There's a human act as well. So make sure you share with your team what your strategy is and the why. It's very easy to make it very technical, and really it's the business advantages, because every industry's been disrupted by more agile, more aggressive players. And if you're not agile in the way that you act, you won't exist. One of the stats I read recently is that from 1950, the FT 500, 88% don't exist today. You've got to think about that. How are we going to be disrupted? What are we going to do? And get the people on board. If you get the culture on board and you get a good communication strategy, it's a heck of a lot easier than you trying to just go into a technical weed session.
And final thoughts from you?
Do it fast.
Do it fast, yes.
Go fast.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, the band has gone, the lights are up, the wine has run out, and the taxis have been called. So that is it for our little sampler of the cloud migration wedding. I would like to thank my wonderful guests, Tom Alisi, John Abel, and Leo Mindel. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.